Global Conservation Corps presents the Rhino Man podcast. I'm John Jerko, your host, and one of the directors of Rhino Man the movie. This podcast series is a way for me to interview top conservationists on the topics of rhinos, the poaching crisis, the importance of rangers, and community engagement, all as a way to create awareness around these issues and to promote the coming release of our documentary film. In this episode, I'm talking with Axel Tarifa. Axel is featured in our coming film, Rhino Man. He grew up in the south of France and always knew he wanted to work with animals. He took a gap year in university, which led to a long stint as a volunteer at the Fundimvelo Thula Rhino Orphanage in South Africa. He is now deep into his studies at the Warsaw University of Life Sciences in the process of becoming a wildlife veterinarian. In this conversation, we talk about Axel's path that took him to South Africa and the amazing experiences he had volunteering at the Rhino Orphanage. We go deep into what it's like to rehabilitate baby rhinos, the effects of trauma on rhinos and wildlife species, and the unique personalities of each animal. Axel also takes us through the traumatic attack by poachers on the Rhino Orphanage, the lessons he learned, and how part of his healing journey was deciding to become a wildlife vet. Axel is graciously vulnerable and full of deep insights into the world of rhino emotions and behaviors. Before we jump in, I'd like to ask you, as always, to please subscribe to and rate the show on your favorite podcast platform, and to share it on social media and with your friends. With your support, the Rhino Man podcast can continue to grow. Now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Axel Tarifa. All right, Axel, welcome to the Rhino Man podcast. It's a real honor to have you on here. I feel like this has been a long time coming. Really excited to dive into this conversation.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here, really.
Yeah, so, you got connected to this project probably a couple years before I did, when Matt and the crew of Rhino Man came down to the Fundimvelo Thula Rhino Orphanage where you were working and shot some footage there of the amazing work you're doing and some of the rhinos there. And a lot has happened since then, and I kind of want to dive into some of the positive side of things with all the work you've been doing on the wildlife, becoming a wildlife veterinarian, but also some of the tragic things that happened at that orphanage and a lot of stuff in between. Maybe before we really jump in, could you give us some context of kind of where you're at right now in life and what's been going on?
So basically, after what happened at the orphanage and after, translocating our current rhinos and hippo to a new safe location, I kind of needed some time, to figure out what I needed, and also needed time for myself to heal really after what happened. And yeah, so in that time, I thought of, what did I do these past few years that I really enjoyed? And that was more or less the veterinary side of the job. So, for me, it was very interesting to see this helpless animal come in, like in a very, very bad states, and see, the process to follow to put him through the trauma, through what he experienced, and through the, not so nice period of time where he has to be fed by human, because it's not so natural. So yeah, and that's why I decided to pursue veterinary studies, and now I'm a fifth year in Warsaw at the University of Life Science. So yeah, fifth year vet student. It's weird to say that because it's almost the end.
That's crazy. It's a long process. It's, becoming a doctor, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
Wildlife, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I want to get into what you're doing with the wildlife veterinarian side, but I think it'd be interesting to go back and kind of dive into what drew you to South Africa to begin with. I don't know, maybe just to give context to people that don't know you, where'd you grow up? What were you doing as a young lad? And was there anything early on that sparked your interest in this whole conservation world and dealing with wildlife?
I think you can probably hear that I'm French, first of all. So yeah, I grew up in the southeast of France, and basically I grew up surrounded by animals. So from a very, very young age, I knew that I wanted to work with animals. And actually I wanted to be a paleontologist first. So, to deal more with bones. But growing up, I think I realized that live animals are better to, work with. So yeah, basically I started, when I had the opportunity at university, I studied biology, and I was also studying animal behavior. And yeah, I just, that's what brought me there. And I was doing internships in zoos in France when I met zookeeper that was going to South Africa. And yeah, he just invited me there, and that's how it all started, really.
Yeah, I feel like, I wanted to be a paleontologist at one time too. It was more because of dinosaurs and my obsession with dinosaurs. I don't know if there was any
Hmm.
crossover there for you, but it also, yeah, seems that wildlife, living animals, they kind of give some love back too when you see, you get to work with them and see them recover. I don't know. Did you have a lot of animals or pets growing up or any connection that helped?
Yeah, no, definitely. I grew up with, dogs, tortoise, goats, chickens, and cats, and all of this. My mom loves animals, so yeah, I was really lucky to grow up surrounded by them for sure.
So it was very like a rural area where you grew up, farmland stuff.
Yeah, so it's very close to the city, but it's just like in the right area of the suburbs to make it like easy for you to have a little bit of land and be able to have animals around. Yeah, for sure.
Interesting. So, what was that experience like when you went to South Africa for the first time? Can you talk about getting over there? Was there any culture shock? Was there excitement? What was that first little adventure
Uh,
like?
Yeah, no, I was definitely excited. That's for sure because it was just a dream to go there. It was my first time in South Africa. It was my first time in Africa actually, and it was just like for me it was a dream because as a kid I watched all those documentaries on National Geographic and all those documentaries with David Attenborough as well. And you just dream of this, especially when you love animals. So being able to be there, it was just amazing. I remember my first sunrise, my first sunset, like it was just another world. And I think what I remember the most, it was at night because, I come from a part of France where light pollution is really, really a big thing here. So you don't really see, for example, the Milky Way. You don't see it just like this at night. And I remember the first time I saw the Milky Way, it was in South Africa. And, I just thought like, wow, I've never seen that before. And it was just so beautiful. So, and then the wildlife, of course, everything is just not the same as in France. We don't have the same wildlife. So yeah, everything was new. Everything was exciting. The people were very nice and it was just magical, really.
What were some of the first places that you visited? Do you remember what areas you went to and what you explored?
So I went straight to KZN, so KwaZulu-Natal, and we started working on opening the orphanage very early on. So at first
Mm.
I didn't visit anything and, up to the point where we received our first rhino, I think I only visited Durban and Richards Bay, which is like a small city an hour away from the reserve. So, I didn't have the opportunity, sorry, to visit that much. But it was just because we were very, very busy with organizing everything. But afterwards, I was able to go to Zimbabwe, which I think is a very nice country,
Mm.
to visit an elephant orphanage there. And later on, I was able to go to Limpopo as well. So special place as well.
Were you involved in the actual like construction of the orphanage itself or helping bring that together? Was it that early on?
No, so I arrived when most of the buildings were already finished and we were just finalizing the last touch, basically. So it was still empty. We were still doing some enclosures, but the main foundation of the orphanage were already there.
And did you get to meet any orphan rhinos on that first trip?
Well, that first trip was basically, I stayed. I remember I took a, yeah, I
Gotcha.
took a visa for 1 year. It was a volunteer visa, and I told my parents it's okay. I'm just taking a gap year. I will be back in a year. It's good for my
Uh,
experience and all of this. And I went there, and I never came back. So, I mean, I had to renew my visa, of course. But yeah.
so you're like, yeah, don't worry, I'm just going to go to South Africa for a year, no big
Hmm.
deal, and
Hmm.
and then you were hooked and couldn't leave.
Exactly. My parents really wanted me to go at least to a master, and I stopped before to
Mm,
pursue that.
mm. And what were your first experiences with the rhinos like when you started to take in some orphans and start to take care for them and learn about what that process was like. I think people were doing this already, but it feels like there's still a lot of learning when it comes to how to rehabilitate these animals. And, even 5-6 years ago, I think the learning curve was still pretty steep. So maybe you can
Hmm.
talk about what that was like.
I was lucky enough to work under Karen Trendler, which is basically a reference when it comes to rehabilitation of rhino orphans. So yeah, I just, for me, this was basically new. I had some experience from zookeeping, let's say from my internships that I did, or, you know, what I did for during university, but I
Mm.
had no practical knowledge about rehabilitating rhino for sure. So that was a lot to learn, but I was really excited and I fell in love with rhinos, so it was very easy to take it all in.
Yeah. So when I got connected to Rhino Man, I remember this is one of the first times that I saw this scene that was captured of you at the orphanage, and you're kind of sitting in front of, I think it was Tondo, Impi, and Gugu, three of the little
Hmm.
orphan rhinos. And it's just such a beautiful scene. And I feel like this scene, and then also just watching more videos like this online, Care for Wild, they're doing some amazing work, and watching all the videos, you just realize that all these little rhinos have their own little amazing personalities. And
Hmm.
I'd love for you to talk about what it was like to get to know those rhinos and what their personalities were like, maybe some of their stories. They were all orphans, so they all kind of have tragic stories, but it's beautiful to see how they can form bonds with each other, and then with you, and maybe talk about what that experience was like.
Yeah, no, I mean, you do yourself between you, the handler, let's say, and the rhino, you do form a very strong bond because, to them, obviously you are giving them milk and food, but you also give them comfort, safety, and it's a very special bond to share, to be honest, and it's very humbling. And you realize that, yeah, I mean, rhinos are those very tough big animals, and they look scary or whatever, but they are actually quite empathetic, I think, and they're very curious as well, especially black rhinos. And talking about personalities, there was this one rhino, Nandi. So she was a black rhino. She's always been, we called her Princess because she was very cheeky, and she wanted her milk that temperature, and if it wasn't, she would just be upset. And it was never enough milk for her. Like she was always hungry for more. And I remember one day I misplaced the keys, and it took me longer than she wanted, I guess, for me to bring the milk. And she really like knocked me in the tibia, which was very painful. But it was Nandy, that's how she was, compared to the other black rhino she was with in the pen, that was Storm, who was like a peaceful boy. It was just like
Hmm.
you gave him food and he was just happy, and there wasn't, he didn't care about anything else, just like give him food, a warm place, and he was the happiest boy. He never hit me, but Nandy, she did many times. She just had this personality, like if she wanted something, she needed it now, or then she will just hit you. And also, how clever they can be, because again, Nandy, Black Rhino, they have this hook lip that they use to take browse or stuff like that. And she somehow, I mean, it was food motivated, of course, but she found a way to open one of our lock. It was just like a sliding lock, so it wasn't
Hmm.
a properly lock. And so she found a way with her top lip to just lift the lock up so she could open the barrier with her horn to get to the lucerne, alfalfa tray that we had in the room with us. And it's just like, sure, I mean, it's for food, so of course she will figure it out, but it's still like very clever and curious. And that just shows you how they interact with their environment. And, they really look at everything, just like a baby does. Like a baby will put like a rock in his mouth if he can. So they just like to touch everything and, sense the environment.
Yeah, just constantly exploring the space, and learning and growing.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you talk about some of the background stories? I don't know if you remember any of
Hmm.
them, but in terms of the situations that the rhinos were found in, and how they were brought in, and maybe just how that affected you too, as you're kind of learning about this traumatic experience.
Hmm. Yeah. So, while I was there, poaching was obviously the main issue, and that's why we had most calves. But we also had the drought that brought some orphans, either because the mother couldn't produce enough milk to feed them, or we also had the case of a rhino that was born too small. So because of the drought, I guess the development wasn't optimal for her in the womb, and she was born very tiny, and she couldn't actually reach the teats to feed on the mother. But to give you some stories, so we had Impy, and I think his story is, very sad, very strong, but it really shows what poaching is like for many, many rhinos. But basically, his mother was killed, so they took the horn, and he was really, really tiny, so they didn't really touch him. But it took the rangers more or less 6 days to find the carcass. So he spent the 6 days, sleeping against the carcass. Scavengers came, so he actually ended up sleeping in the carcass. So he was really covered of carcass fluid. He had to eat mud because, he was hungry. So he just had to eat mud. So he was also constipated, which was, another thing to add on top of everything else that was wrong. And it also shows you how strong the bond between the mother and the baby is as well, because they wouldn't leave their mother. They will really stay with her in most cases. And, when you see this rhino that stinks of carcass fluids, and you know that, he spent all this time with the mother and he arrives at the orphanage, and at night, they try to fall asleep and then they wake up and they call for the mother. It's just like, even for you, it's hard to witness and to watch, because you don't know what he went through, but you are kind of helpless in that case, and it's quite hard. Yeah. And I think that story kind of reflect what poaching is like for those babies, really.
Yeah. Can you talk to, for people that maybe don't understand, is just, being out there for 6 days with when there's a dead carcass, there's a lot of scavengers that come, and even bigger wildlife like lions that could come by looking for calves or just trying to get some food. Can you talk about the dangers? It's pretty amazing that Impy survived for that long to be found and rescued.
Yes, for sure. And, I think in many, many cases of rhino poached, they don't necessarily find a baby, but it doesn't mean the baby wasn't there, because, like you say, you have all those big predators and scavengers that may find the baby. The baby may die, of dehydration, starvation first, and then be eaten by the predators. Nature is a wild place. It's quite cruel as well. So other animals don't care if you're a baby without your mom. They will just eat you if, they can, if it's, what they are, carnivores. So no, they have to go through a lot, and it's definitely a traumatic event for them.
I don't know if you're doing any work on this or thinking about it, but I've talked to a few people on this podcast about trauma more in terms of frontline workers, but I think a lot of people forget the trauma that the wildlife faces, whether that's an orphan or even a fully grown adult that's poached and survives. Could you talk more to that trauma and if there's anything that you're thinking of as you're going through all this schooling about how that kind of comes into the way that they're cared for and rehabilitated and that bond and connection?
Yeah, no. So if you look at neuroscience, there's been many studies that demonstrated that all mammals share an extensive developmental attachment mechanism, and that kind of share a common stress regulating process within our brain. So when you have traumatic events, there is many studies on animals, just like human, that show that survivors of trauma early in life has lasting, let's say, effect on the brain and the behavior. So basically, just as in human you will see sign of PTSD, in animals you can see also this kind of PTSD-like signs. So the trauma that those orphans go through because of the poaching event definitely does affect them in similar ways. Just, we basically share very similar brain as mammals. So yeah, so basically they have left side, right side, the right side where our emotion are processed. So they are also affected, by the trauma. And if you look at mother and infant relationship, early trauma are known to affect what we call the corticolimbic region, which is a region that integrates emotions with cognition. So it's basically what your behavior are like based on the environment that you are in. And so such disturbance as at an early age between the mother and the infant are known to make you more vulnerable to PTSD and to predispose animals or humans that go through that to violence as well as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
So, we know through science and neuroscience that there is tangible effect of trauma and early trauma, especially on humans and many animals.
I think that's something that a lot of people forget when it comes to this whole poaching crisis or poaching of any wildlife or just disruption of the animals and their habitats is you don't think of the downstream effects that this could have on their social interactions and maybe even breeding or the aggressiveness towards each other or other wildlife or humans. When you hear about it a lot with elephants where, maybe a bull elephant survives its herd being poached at a young age or something like that, or gets separated or moved and there's not an adult to help guide them. And then they become really aggressive and have to be, culled or taken out because they're too aggressive towards humans. So yeah, I think there's a lot of implications that we don't think about. And I don't know, is there any work being done to understand during the rehabilitation process, like say at the orphanage, how, there's a lot of efforts in terms of therapy for humans, but now it's almost thinking about it like in terms of for rhinos or some other animal that's being rehabilitated, how do you help them overcome that in a way that they can be released in a healthier manner? I don't know if it's possible or not, or if there's work being done.
I think it would be very hard to emulate exactly how the mother interact with the orphan to kind of, make sure that he will produce the same neuroendocrine hormones that will, help the development of his brain in the right way. But, I think, and there's very, very little studies and data available or that's being shared, in a scientific manner. So to be honest, like there is very little information out there. And this is definitely something that people should look into and maybe do more research on, because I think, just like you said, it's very important. And we know very little. We know that poaching has been going on for years and years, but we don't know what's the actual effect on, those survivors. Will they be good because they survive? We raise them, release them back into the wild, but will they reproduce exactly the same? Will they raise their offsprings exactly the same? There is definitely a stress. There is a concept of intergenerational transmission of trauma as well. So, a population that's under heavy stress and that is exposed to constant trauma, their offsprings are actually more likely to experience PTSD-like symptoms or also similar traumas. So, with this crisis that's been ongoing for such a long time, I think there is very little that we know of what all the implications are in the future for the rhino population as a whole. And as also the numbers decrease, each individual is more and more important. So that's really something that's should be looked into for sure. So I hope people are looking into it, and I will for sure once I'm done studying. And that's definitely something I want to work on. Yeah,
It's extremely interesting, and I'm sure just complicated to even work out how to go about that. Because it's like two different species interacting and trying to raise another one.
Yes, it's just not natural. It's just
Yeah.
and you will never. It's just like when we use milk replacer, we will never use milk that's as good as the mom's one. But we kind of found a way to make it work. So I hope that we are able to kind of find protocols that make the rehabilitation as natural as possible and kind of make this the general rules for everyone. Because I think that's also, I don't know if it's a problem, but I think it could be an issue when you have many, many different people, let's say, raising rhinos, and if you want those rhinos to have conservation value, I think that they should all be raised in ways, that are the most optimal for, to keep a conservation value for those animals. And when you have many, many places that do different things and whatever, you can have, then problematic rhinos that are not raised properly. I mean, there's many cases of those. So yeah, there is so many possibilities, and
extremely complex.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
It is very complex. Yeah. And I don't think, people were expecting that to last that long and be such a problem.
Yeah. Could you go, this is going backwards a little bit, but I'm curious, when you got involved down there, when did you become aware of the poaching crisis, and how did that impact your perception of what was going on in South Africa, in terms of wildlife?
Do you mean when I was working at the orphanage?
Yeah, I guess just when did you become aware of poaching overall? I mean, was this something that you learned about as you were getting ready to go down there, or maybe through your zoo experience? And when did the reality of it hit you? I don't know if you ended up ever seeing any carcasses of adult poached rhinos before the orphanage or while forming it.
So, I knew of poaching through my studies and, like you said, my involvement in zoos, because through conservation work, I mean, you're exposed to this reality. And of course, when I arrived at the orphanage, but I think what's kind of interesting and saddening, really, is that you know that poaching is there. You know that it's all around you, and you also know that you're raising babies that are targets. So I feel like maybe our mind as a security, you kind of like omit that part of your life. You just think, you don't think about it anymore. It maybe becomes kind of a normality, which is not good at all. And you kind of, it's there, and I think your subconscious just put it aside, and because you need to do your work anyway, so you need to, keep going for those animals because they only have you. But yeah, and the first poached rhino carcass that I saw was actually the orphanage after we were attacked by poachers. Yeah, because we had to euthanize one of the survivors of the poaching attack, and then did the necropsy with the vets.
And maybe we could build up to that attack, and kind of building off of what you're saying, the security side of it, you just kind of become normalized. It becomes normalized and you kind of forget about it. Maybe related to that, you can talk about what your day-to-day was like there once you started to have rhinos and you were taking care of them. What was going on? What was that process like? What were you doing?
Well, it was just, I think for me, I was just like going through the shift and, feeding the animals. Basically, you just want them to have everything they need to be the healthiest possible. And you really just don't think about the security sides, or at least, it wasn't my priority. It wasn't my job as well, really. I was more there to take care of the animals at first. My managing job came afterwards. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just curious about, what was that caretaking responsibility like? That we talked a little bit about it, but maybe more in some more detail. Like, is it essentially just feeding them and then comforting them? Were you living at that location as well to be there more often? I don't know how often you need to be with these young ones when they come in.
Yeah, no, we lived on site, and how often you need to take care of them, it really depends on the age. It depends if they're alone, because our first rhino, Ituba, he arrived at the orphanage the 8th of April 2015, and the next calf arrived in, if I remember correctly, it was October or November, because it was the black rhino that arrived second. So yeah, we had a very big time frame where we had only one calf with us. And so, in that case, because he was alone, he needed us even more because he doesn't have other friends to rely on and seek comfort from and do rhino stuff with. So we literally had to show him how to mud bath. I mean, how they know how to roll. They don't need you for that, but we had to remind him at least to do a regular mud bath for his the health of his skin, and also for the feed. It depends on the age of the animal. It can go from every 2-3 hours, day and night, to I think at the end close to weaning, they were being fed like once or twice a day. So and the rearing of rhinos, it lasts depending on at what age they arrive, of course. But the youngest we had was a few days old, and that rhino, she will need to be fed up to 15 months, 18 months old. So it's a very long process, and a lot of feeds and tons of milk, literally, to be fed. But yeah, so basically, the life at the orphanage, you will just wake up in the morning, check on the animals, check with the people that were on night shift, make sure everyone was healthy, everyone ate their food, then do the next feeding, give them food, hay. For the black rhino, we had to go cut browse as well, so we just take the car and cut some branches in the reserve. And it was just, our job was really making sure that they had everything they needed to thrive.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of physical labor, really. I mean, what was going through your mind at that time after days and days of doing this? Were you still just driven to see these little guys grow up and be released? What was driving you at that point?
Yeah, I think it's really all about the release. To be fair, although I didn't witness any of our release, because basically once a rhino will be weaned, we will transfer them to the release area, and then other people, so they will be like relocated to, let's say, temporary enclosures in the area where they will be released, which are very big, so they're more independent. And then later on, once we're sure they've acclimated to the new area, the food and all of this, they will be released. So I've never seen an actual release, but just seeing them off from the orphanage, going with them to the new place, seeing them being happy and not needing you as much. Even at the orphanage, when they're close to winning, they really don't need you as much. They actually, some of them, because of their personality, they're just like, what are you doing here? Just get out of here. So I think that's what drives you, really. And what was driving me was really, seeing those animals that arrive so compromised and how we managed to put them through, what was wrong with them, and seeing them thrive afterwards. That's really the goal. But I wouldn't say that it's that physical. Of course it is. Like when you have to carry with one hand 12 liters of milk and feed 2 rhinos at the same time with 12 liters of milk in each hand, it is physical, that's true. But I think you get tired more with the lack of sleep, because it requires round the clock work in many cases, especially with young rhinos. And you probably get tired as well from seeing the trauma they went through as well, because it's never easy. Especially the cry and the call for mom is really, really sad, to be honest. It's never something you can get used to.
Yeah, you hear a little bit of that in some of the footage that we captured in the film, and I didn't know that that's the sound that rhinos made, and I think those cries were more for out of hunger, but I can imagine it's probably even more emotional when it's for their mother. Just those subtle differences. But I'm sure you get somewhat connected to these rhinos. What's that like when you have to let them go? Because ultimately, and maybe you can talk to this a little bit too. I think they usually at these orphanages, they want to limit the amount of people that have interactions so that the rhinos don't become too comfortable with getting close to people in general. But what's that bond like for you, and how do you separate and let go? Is it difficult, or is it just part of the process that you understand?
Well, in my case, it wasn't that difficult, just because I was so excited to see them, think that they will be released back into the wild, because that's the end goal. And, it makes all the sleepless nights worth it, literally, for me. In my case, I think, it's just beautiful to see them, explore a new area and just be happy and, be themselves out there. Yeah, but also I think personally I was more scared than for them because I know that, they survived the poaching attack. They survived the death of their mom. We put them through everything. They're released back into the wild, but then, will they live their full lifespan? I think that's the big question. So for me, it wasn't hard in the way that, I have to see them go. I think the hardest was to, hope that they will live a good 20, 30 years at least, if not reach their full lifespan.
Are you fearing that they'd be poached, or are you fearing that maybe they just won't be accepted by other rhinos, or is it a combination?
Yeah, no, being poached for sure.
Yeah.
Like, they will get accepted by other rhino, I hope. They can't be that bad. We didn't do that bad of a work, hopefully. But no, I think it's really like poaching because, it's happening every single night. Every day you have rhinos dying. So I think, yeah, that's what's really worrying when you know they are about to be released. Of course, you hope they don't end up, facing lions suddenly because, at the orphanage, we never showed them what lions were and we didn't, tell them to run away when they see one. But yeah, I think, poaching is the biggest threat when it comes to what the life after release.
I feel like you probably have all the skills to be a good dad with all those sleepless nights taking care of young children for so long.
I don't know if I would do the same for a human. That's my problem. Like animals, yes, but humans, I don't know if I can do that. That's why, I try to be a vet, not a human doctor, I guess.
Yeah. Dedicate your life to your passion. That's
exactly.
Maybe we could talk about what happened with this attack and however you want to take it there. I was just looking it up online before this call and realized that I think it was 6 years ago yesterday is actually the anniversary of when it happened. I was looking up some articles. I think it was February 20th, maybe. I don't know if the date comes to mind, but...
So it was February. I don't have the exact date. I know it was, if I remember correctly, a Monday night. But, it's kind of blurrish, to be honest. But yeah, no, it's the anniversary was not long ago for sure. I think I every year, mid-February, I think about it, of course. But I think I've let go of the date by now, yeah.
Can you talk about that night and maybe just kind of lead us into what you were doing and what happened from your perspective?
So that night I was off shift. Everything was as usual at the orphanage. We had a few volunteers with us, long-term volunteers with us, that were on shift that night with one of our staff members. And basically, it was my night off, so I decided to go to bed early so I could rest a little. And we had a dog, Karen's dog with us, Duma, a German Shepherd. And I took him with me because, we had snakes coming at night very often. So I figured I would just keep him inside with me. So yeah, I just went to my room, watched a movie and fell asleep. And I just heard Duma barking at the door and that woke me up. It was raining outside. So I just said, what's going on? And I heard my colleague, Nicole, that was telling me to just come out. They needed me, but to leave the dog inside, not to let the dog leave the room. So immediately my first thought was snakes. And that's why she wanted the dog to stay inside. Because we had a snake, few snakes inside the house. And yeah, so I just, told the dog to sit and stay and opened the door. And that's when I saw the first thing I saw was a handgun on my forehead, really. But yeah, I just saw the girls in the background and two guys. So one guy with a gun pointed at me. And my first reaction was to kind of step back because, at that exact moment, I just couldn't understand what was going on. And one of the guys grabbed me by the collar and dragged me out of the room. And yeah, and then they just kind of took us to the office. And that's when in the hallway, I saw two other guys, one with the axe, and it's when I saw the axe that I understood it was for the rhino. Because, before that, it could have been just for burglary or, whatever. But when I saw the axe, then I knew they were coming for the rhino. So yeah, they took us to the office. They tied us up, but then they took me out of the office because they wanted me to. Well, first they wanted to know where the rhino horn was and where the safe was. So I had to explain to them that we didn't have a safe and we didn't have rhino horns. We were just a rhino orphanage. But yeah, they just kept going about those rhino horns, and then they wanted money, and they wanted me to open all the rooms of the main house of the orphanage and gather all the volunteers in the office, and yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's just extremely traumatic situation. I can't even put myself in it. But yeah, did it seem like this was like a well organized group, or was it? Do you think it was just someone that got? Yeah, go ahead.
I think it was definitely well organized. I mean, they knew we only had one guard. They knew I was the only guy there. I mean, only guy as a staff member. Because when they grabbed the two girls, they immediately told them, where is the man and where's the dog? So they knew I was there, or the only guy there, and they knew we had a dog as well. And they also, I know they broke our cameras. We had like several cameras around the facility, and they broke them all. So, they had like some kind of knowledge of the layout of the facility and where our cameras were and all of this. So it was definitely well organized. They also, at first you don't think about it, but when they asked me about the rhino horns, two of our calves were supposed to be moved. And when you move them for the translocation to the release area, we removed the horns. So somehow they knew that those rhinos because they were supposed to be moved a week before. So maybe they thought that the rhinos, sure, the move didn't happen, but they were dehorned. And I think that's the horn they were looking for, thinking that we dehorned them already. So they knew a lot of stuff, and they were definitely organized for this attack. Like the timing, of the attack and those rhinos moving or supposed to move was already suspicious.
It just seems like in so many of these cases, there's always, some kind of inside information or people that have just been observing and gathering that information to be able to try and pull these types of things off. What was going through your head after everyone was kind of rounded up and the gravity of what was happening kind of hit you? I mean, I don't know if you can talk to what your thoughts were. I mean, did you feel like you could do anything? Or
So that will come back to what I was saying earlier, when the danger is there, but you kind of omit it. So basically, I've always been told that, we were a possible target. It was a possibility because we have rhino in enclosure. It's easy to find them when they are close to release or to be moved out of the orphanage. They usually have a, small horns, sure, but it's still worth a little bit of money. So they are targets, realistically. So we are potential targets and collateral damage of poaching's event, right? So, but I was always told that if you don't interfere, if you, do whatever they ask you to do, give them, if you have the petty cash box, give them the petty cash box. If they ask you to open this door, like just don't try to get in the way. There is no reason for them to kill you or to hurt you, right? Because their goal is just to take the horn and leave as fast as possible before security kicks in. So that's what I've always been told. And that night, that's all I could think about, In my head, I was like, okay, just don't interfere, do what they want, and everything will be fine. Which, was not so right in that case because they were much more aggressive and,
Yeah, I don't know if you could talk at all to, I mean, did they physically abuse you? And I mean, or was it more of just kind of throw you in the corner and then they did what they wanted?
They did hit me with the panga, with the back of the panga, not the cutting edge, which was, hard enough to give me a small wound. But I wouldn't say that, I was beaten up or anything because it's not the case. But, they were not as nice with some of my colleagues, especially female colleagues. So, I didn't end up with the biggest damage, I would say, but some of my colleagues did.
When they realized that there weren't any rhino horns in the safe, did that seem to make them more angry or aggressive, or did they feel like you were lying?
Yeah, they felt like I was lying. And also, when they wanted me to open some of the doors, I didn't have the keys for every single doors. And, even if I did have the keys, with the panic and the stress, I was trying every single keys I could think of, but, I was probably missing the right one. So that's when, they started to hit me. But yeah, it's, they were definitely impatient. And afterwards, because they kind of held us hostage for an hour or so, I was thinking about the safe, because we did have a safe actually. And, I was really scared that they would see the safe, which was a drug safe for the vet drugs, and think that, I lied and rhino horns were there, and, they would come back to beat me up. But luckily, they didn't find that safe.
Mm.
So they didn't think I lied, but they could have for sure.
And then what happened to the rhinos? What did they end up doing in the end?
So I think they looked, because we could follow their tracks around some of the enclosure, and they found, so the two biggest rhinos, they were like on the side boma, and they shot both of them. One of them was shot and probably, died very, very shortly after, if he wasn't killed on the spot. And the other one, they shot him as well, but they didn't kill him, or, basically, once we didn't hear any more noise, and, we waited for some time to pass, we freed ourselves, and I took a light and I went to the boma to see, and yeah, one of them was still alive, dehorned, sinus open, they just destroyed his face literally, but he was still conscious and, still alive and in pain and, suffering really. So they did a better job for sure.
So they essentially used that axe that you saw to just hack off the horns.
Mm-hmm.
And what type of weapon did they have? Was it a rifle or just a pistol?
So I'm French and I know nothing about weapons. Weapons are not a thing in my country. I'm not a hunter either. So yeah, I don't really know much about weapons. I did recognize, I think, a hunting rifle with a silencer, even though the silencer didn't really it looked more homemade than anything else. So yeah, I guess it was a hunting rifle. But I think what made it very hard, I mean, they killed rhinos we took care of, so it was awful anyway, but the one that survived but was still suffering was actually Impy, the one we talked about earlier. And he was laying in a puddle of mud, which to me, was very, very hard to find and hard to witness, because it was his story all over again for me. We saved him from and tried to put him through what happened, and he died more or less the same story, and that was hard.
Yeah, what were you going through at that time? I mean, it's just listening to this is pretty emotional. I don't know, like right after and then just the days following, how did you process that?
I at the time, I remember Dr. Johan Murray was working on Hope, and they did like some good work on reconstruction, and and I was really hoping that our vet could save Impy. So I tried to make him comfortable, but there was nothing much I could do. I managed to put a log under his chin to keep him from putting his head down in the mud, so he wouldn't inhale too much mud. So yeah, I was just I called for help and called for Karen, my boss, and hoping that the vet would arrive and save him, but the damage were too extensive and he had to be put down. So I think that was hard, but at the same time, he wasn't not suffering anymore, so it was the best option for him. And yeah, and after, the life after the attack, the next days, everything is, I don't know, the atmosphere was just very heavy. And so you have this kind of loss and grief that you go through. I don't think I processed any of the trauma at that time yet at all. Everything was just, a weird feeling, really. But at the same time, we still had other rhinos to take care of. We still had young orphans. We had Charlie the hippopotamus, were in need of our care. So we still had to keep going and take care of them. So I think we had to kind of put some of our feelings in a box and had to deal with them later.
What was the reaction from press and media? Were people coming to the orphanage to interview you? I don't know how that. I mean, in the mix of all these emotions and dealing with that other additional pressure, I don't know if you had to face much of that.
No, not that much. We had like a very good managing team at the orphanage, really. So they took care of all of this kind of aspect. We were recording a documentary at the same time, so those cinematographer also, helped us with dealing with that. I think they were covering it so other people didn't have to come for us. For us, it was at that time having those people that you know and trust. It was just, easier. I think if other people had to come in or whatever, that would have made everything harder when you don't know them. And so I think our managing team just handled it the best way for us.
Yeah, I mean, just want to thank you for sharing that, because it's extremely, yeah, just sounds like an extremely traumatic experience. And just for you to be that vulnerable about that situation, just really, really appreciate it. Because I think, and maybe we can talk about this next, the kind of the days and months and years afterwards. A lot of folks on the front lines are facing these types of things, whether it's the trauma of seeing these rhinos or the trauma of, fellow teammates being threatened or killed, or, their own experiences like yours. It's a lot of human traumas being experienced because of this situation. And I don't know if you could go into what that was like. I don't know how much longer you were at the orphanage after this attack, and when you kind of decided to go back to France, and you said you eventually, after some time processing, decided to follow the career path you're on. But what were those months and years shortly after like for you?
So the attack was mid-February, and I think we took the decision because we had the threat of another attack months later, or a few weeks later. So yeah, we basically did like some security audit and decided to actually close the orphanage where it was located and transfer, or kind of, relocate ourselves to another place. So we transferred the orphan, I think it was end of April or beginning of May. And I went with all of them to the new place and, do some training for the people there. And yeah, I think in June, maybe end of May or June, I was probably there for like a few weeks, a month maximum. I don't think it was that long. Yeah, I just went back to France because I needed, some to just like refocus on what happened and deal with my feelings, my emotions as well, and be with my family.
Is there any part of that healing process that you can talk to in terms of things that helped you get through this and process some of this?
Mm-hmm. I think what really helped me first was to talk through what happened. Like I said, we were filming a documentary at the time, and the next day, I kind of talked about what happened, and that actually really helped, instead of keeping everything for myself. And also our managing team got us help with psychologists, which talk about what happened and what you did or didn't do, and all of this. That really helped. But Otherwise, it just needs time. Like you can't forget everything, you know, that fast. And I think there is many aspects as well that you think you've dealt with that may come back years later as well. And I don't know, I might still be dealing with some stuff 6 years later. It's quite possible. But overall, I think, I don't know if you can move on ever from this, but I've learned to live with it for sure. But I think, one advice I could give is really to talk about it, not be afraid of, what you're feeling. And if you feel like you didn't do something, just talk about it and, with the right person, of course. And, you shouldn't feel ashamed or like you didn't do enough, because there is very little you can do in this situation. And, we have a French saying that if we could redo the world, because, you're always like, if I did this and if I did that, or if I would do this, you could just change end world poverty and end the world hunger and stuff with if. So,
yeah. Could you talk about when in our last conversation, kind of thinking about this podcast, you brought up, you kind of mentioned that you feel like you've worked through most of these feelings, but one of the first times that things came up for you was when you were watching the recent Avatar film and the poaching of I always forget the name of it, but it's kind of that whale-like creature. Could you talk about that scene and just, for you too, how I feel like it seemed like it was pretty realistic representation of what these animals have to go
exactly,
through.
yeah. So that was last December. So almost 6 years after the attack. Just so seeing in this movie Avatar, the Way of Water, the poaching of those kind of whale-like species. And for me, it was really the scene where you see the baby that stays next to the mother, and basically 6 years later, it kind of revived more feeling of, what it felt like to see what they go through, and this strong bond between the baby and the mother, the baby that won't leave the side. So when the rescuer arrived, the baby is dead by the side of the mom. It's just, yeah, I think the way they captured it was really realistic, and it showed the reality of what rhino go through and many other species of animal go through because of poaching. So yeah, no, it was a weird surge of feeling when I first saw that scene, for sure.
Yeah, I saw it, I think, in December as well. And it's definitely, it's a beautiful film, and just crazy what James Cameron's able to do with special effects and things like that. But, and yeah, that scene definitely rings true. And, I never experienced it, but just hearing so many of these stories about poached rhinos and their calves. And yeah, it felt very true to life in that way.
It was definitely true to life. Kind of scary when you think about it. But I think it's important for people to realize that, it's happening every day around us.
Yeah. I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about in terms of just trauma in general for animals and wildlife. And it's so hard for us to put ourselves inside of the mind of another species, and think of what's their experience like. There's all these conversations of like, do they have consciousness or not? But you can definitely, if you watch the behavior, it's hard to not deny that there's got to be some kind of experience that isn't too far removed from our own, and the things that we as humans do to them is pretty devastating. And we're able to, sadly, it's easy for us to separate that in a lot of cases, what we do to these animals and how we feel about it. But if you're really exposed to those bonds between the animals, then it kind of it changes your perspective on life as a whole.
Yeah, no, you're right, for sure. It's so easy because I believe, I don't know, I'm not them, but I believe that people that do this to animals probably, think that they don't feel, they don't have emotion. It's just wrong. They do, unfortunately. They very much feel like us. And yeah, what we do to them affect them, maybe not exactly the same, but in similar ways because of the similarity that we share. So if people, could realize that, maybe show more kindness, that would be a step forward.
And I think that's some of the value too in getting connected to these wild places and really spending time out there. If you're born in a city and you're completely separated from wildlife, it's really hard to, you just see them on a screen. It's more of a feel almost, experiencing those interactions in between different animals and even between different species. And it's a beautiful thing once you start to have that connection. And it's part of the beauty of Africa and one of these places that still has so many of these wild places and so much wildlife that, yeah, it's really, really beautiful place.
That's true. And that's the importance of, education and showing kids that don't necessarily have access to such places, what's out there and, why they should protect them as well.
So as you were in France, recovering, processing, what was that spark that made you say, I want to go and take about 6 years of my life to become a wildlife vet, and then all the work it's going to take to get back to Africa to do that work. What was that spark, and what's that journey been like?
So I worked a little bit, just like a random boring job, and I think I thought like, what am I going to do? Because I didn't see myself pursuing the same studies as I did before, and I couldn't see myself, doing a random job at the factory or administration job like behind the desk on a computer or something like that. So I really think, yeah, working for a few months made me realize that I need to do something that I like. And yeah, just like think, what did I do that I really enjoyed this past few years? And it was really, I think for me, the veterinary side of things. And for me, I didn't want this chapter of my life, South Africa and rhinos, to end with this attack, because I think for me it would be a bit like, letting those poachers win. And I really wanted to claim that part of my life back. So I always knew I wanted to return to South Africa at one point, or Africa as a continent in general, and work with rhinos again. And so then I thought, I need to, in the meantime, to do something that will make me even more useful. And I really, really liked the veterinary knowledge back then because, our vets will tell us to give that drug or another drug to treat colics in those babies. But I didn't know why the colics was happening, or, I was just doing what I was being told. And I realized that maybe if I study to be a vet, then I will ultimately be able to help even more, those babies. So yeah, that's really why I decided to pursue those long studies. And yeah, I think ultimately it was really to be able to help even more. Because, well, if I say that and my mom hears me, she's going to scream. But, I don't ultimately want to work as a vet. But as long as, I can use those skills to make the process of rehabilitation better for those rhinos, then that's what matters to me. But yeah, just we keep it on the down low. And
yeah. Don't listen to this podcast, Mom.
Exactly.
So you really want to go back and be able to work with the orphans again? Is that really your focus?
Yeah, no, I think there is a lot of work to be done. There is obviously, poaching is still ongoing, and there's still a lot of stuff to be done there. And I think there is few aspects that we discussed earlier that I would like to pursue when it comes to trauma and how to deal with it. Because now going through the vet studies, I know of some pharmacological treatment that maybe could help and alleviate such a side effect of trauma. But are they useful? Maybe we need to look more into it. And yeah, that's
it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of talk too about even like hallucinogens and using those for this type of trauma. I don't know if they have any of similar effects on rhinos or other mammals, but I mean, it's just a whole world. Give a rhino a big trip, but a whole world of unexplored ideas.
Yeah, that's very true. But it's funny because I remember we had one orphan elephant at the orphanage once, and he was teething, so he wasn't hitting as much. And Karen, I remember, asked another elephant rehabber, what, just for help, or like to share some thoughts and see what could be done to stimulate the appetite of this baby elephant. And she was telling her that, in her area, they were using, I can't remember the name of the plant, but Karen was like, oh, I've never heard of this plant before. And she was like, yes, you did hear of this plant before. And she was like, no, I really don't think so. And she said, yes. And it was basically just cannabis, that they were making tea out of it to stimulate the appetite of those baby elephants. So you see, it's just interesting. I'm not promoting it, of course, but
yeah, nature provides a lot of interesting solutions if we're willing to be open to
exactly,
it.
exactly. It's just, if it works, why not? I
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any studies out there that proves it, but
I don't think we have to worry about too many pothead rhinos or anything, that getting out of control.
no.
But yeah, it's super interesting. And could you talk a little bit to just the experience of going through the veterinary school and what kind of work that's been, why you chose the school you did, for any future wildlife vets out there, give a little bit of background on what this process has been like, because it's not an easy journey from what I understand.
Mm-hmm. So I went to Warsaw in Poland because I wanted to study in English, because the ultimate goal was to go back to an English speaking country.
Mm.
So yeah, that was the main motivation as why I went to the Warsaw Vet School. But then what it's about, it's a lot of work for sure. But interestingly, I think for me it was kind of easier than other people because I had this life and work experience. That kind of helped me with those long hours of studies. And there is, I remember a few things on my first year that were linked to anatomy, because, rhinos and horse are basically from the same family. So they have very similar, if not the same, digestive tract. And I remember for most of my colleagues learning, because we had to learn in Latin all those names of the parts of the digestive tract for horses, was very hard. But for me, because I could, piece it to some stuff that I saw in South Africa, or, for colleagues who were using buscopan on those orphans. And now I see that it's, because it has effect on smooth muscle of the intestine. And, it just, you kind of make those little connections that helps you through the studies, I think. And that was a big help for me because I could link some of my own experience to studying, and it made learning much, much, much more easier. But, it's still hard. It's still a lot of work, a lot of subjects. But yeah, I think it's worth it. And, if you're really passionate about it, wildlife and veterinary medicine, you should just go for it. And there is also no age, because look, I'm turning 30 and just about to be a vet. So just don't hesitate. If you're passionate about it, just go for it. There's many options out there.
Yeah. You're such an old man, Axel. Jeez.
Yeah, I know, right?
It's super interesting, talking about, I think, having that real world connection or real world problems just makes learning in general so much more interesting and exciting. And it's great that you had that connection beforehand, because and something that's takes that many years to work through to get to the other end. If you don't have something that's driving you, it's going to be really a slog to make it to the other side. So it definitely makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's actually insane, how your brain works, and how your memory retains stuff so easily when you can connect things together. Memory is crazy when you think about it, the way it works. But yeah, if you can connect pieces, I think it just makes the whole process much more easier. And yeah, you can do whatever, no limits.
So what's next? How much longer do you have with school? What do you have to do after that before you get to go back to South Africa? And what's kind of the process to becoming a full-fledged wildlife vet?
Well, so in Warsaw, I don't do much wildlife, of course. I do have a module on wildlife and zoo animals next semester. So yeah, I have 2 semesters left. So that's basically now less than a year, because I'm starting one of them now. And then I'll graduate. And I think I would preferably work in some practice, maybe mixed practice, in an English-speaking country for a year or two, just to gain, some critical skills and basic skills. before, trying to go back to South Africa, I will have to pass an exam to, validate my diploma and my knowledge. That's not from a South African university. And yeah, I think then you have to do 1 year of community service, and then, you can be a vet. Not a wildlife vet, but a vet at least.
Yeah, and then it's just a process of maybe trying to find those projects where you can get involved and start to really connect with what you're most passionate about. Yeah, it's such a exciting journey, just kind of like looking through your path. It's like lots of ups and downs, but some amazing work you've been doing, and just can tell you're so passionate about this work, and yeah, just caring for wildlife and finding better ways to rehabilitate them. And hopefully we have less reason to rehabilitate them because of poaching in the future, but there's always going to be reasons to figure out how to make that work, even if we somehow solve all the poaching issues. Like you said, there's droughts, there's other things that happen. So it's always going to be really important. And there's so much to learn as well, which is kind of exciting too. It seems like you're someone that loves learning. So like it's definitely a path with endless learning possibilities as you move forward.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, there might be another species that might, need help in the future as well. And, whatever we learn from how to manage this influx of survivors from poaching with rhinos might help with other species as well.
Yeah. What kind of advice would you give someone maybe starting out? Maybe there's a couple different areas we could cover. What would you tell yourself in the early days of working at the orphanage that maybe would have helped you out? Because I feel like, a lot of people go volunteer in different countries for similar causes. And I mean, maybe it's hard because you never know really what the situation is going to be and whose responsibility different things are. But, in terms of giving yourself advice around the safety side, maybe that would be interesting. And then we could talk a little bit more about just general advice for kind of following your passion.
Well, for the safety, of course, the safety, like if you're not safe yourself, we need you healthy and alive to take care of those animals. So whoever is getting involved with this kind of line of work and with species that are highly targeted, such as rhinos, you sure need to make sure that the place is safe, there is proper security measures, and that they have proper protocol in place as well in case anything happens. Who's the contact person if anything happens, or just make sure everything works smoothly, because at the end of the day, it's your life that may be endangered, and you need to make sure that you've put everything in place to make sure nothing happens to you. If you're not there, then the animals won't thrive. So I think, yeah, safety is definitely the biggest thing to think of, and then maybe to just keep like an open mind. You're there to learn, and there's many things to learn, and there's stuff that you might think you need to do certain ways, and actually you can do it other ways. And I was lucky to go there when I was young. I'm not that old, but I was turning 22, I think, when I went there. So I really, really learned a lot there, and I grew up to who I am today. I guess there I kind of learned a lot. So just keep an open mind. Make sure you learn as much as you can, because there's a lot of growth possibilities when you do such work.
Yeah, good advice. You kind of have to leave your ego at the door and be open to learn.
Mm-hmm. And I think in many fields, ego is always an issue, right? In like many companies, and like there's always ego that gets involved. So yeah, that's definitely something you should leave at the door.
Yeah, especially if you're new. I mean, it's all learning and listening
exactly
at the beginning, because you don't know the situation. It's easy to bring your perspective and judge too quickly, which kind of cuts you off from possibilities. So
exactly, and even I see it with medicine. I mean, veterinary medicine. You learn new stuff quite it's like a continuous learning. You have new techniques and new drugs being developed, and also new disease. We've seen it with COVID. You need to learn to adapt. So it's always good to keep your mind open and just learn from whatever you can.
So what keeps you going? I mean, you're doing some pretty intense work right now. You've been through some pretty traumatic experiences, but what drives you to keep getting up every day and working towards this goal and doing this work?
I think the memory of some of rhinos like Impy, I owe that to him for sure. I shouldn't say that I failed him because it's not the case. I've learned that to accept that. But in some ways, I think that if I do this, it's for him for sure, because he's one of many, and many more will probably be like him. So that really gave me a reason to keep going, to maybe be able to help the next MP, let's say. Although in a perfect world, there will not be, another MP for sure, but that's not where we live in, unfortunately. So yeah, that's for sure. And, also other rhino orphans that I worked with, like Ituba, that's been released, and, now he's living freely his best life in the wild. And, knowing that, it also keeps you going, because, you did good and you want to do more good. So, yeah.
Yeah, beautifully put. And another question, why do you do these types of media things? I watched the movie Stroop when it came out a few years back, which covers a lot of different angles of the rhino poaching crisis and what happened at the orphanage, which your story was a part of. You've been on podcasts. You were, you're in Rhino Man. We recorded you back in probably 2016 before I was even involved.
Yeah.
But why are you open to talking about this type of stuff?
Because I just, I think the more people know about what's going on out there, maybe the more we might be able to change, because at the end of the day, it's just through numbers that we can make the biggest change. So it's not me trying to do, save few rhinos out there that will change the rhino poaching crisis. Like, all of us need to work together. So being able to, share the story and just try to, maybe touch someone else through what happened. Yeah, I think that's quite important, to try to rally other people to the cause and make them, realize that they can actually also do something, not necessarily like, on the ground or whatever, but you can try to, I don't have the word in English, unfortunately, but yeah, I would say educate, but I don't know, it sounds a bit condescending. But yeah, you can just spread the words and make sure that other people know about it. And if you have some experience of what's going on, to just not share it with others.
Yeah, I think there's so many ways to get involved, and like you're saying, you can do things to inspire and advocate and share with other people what's going on. And also there's, so many different skills that you can bring to the table and ways to help. And yeah, it's been great getting to know you more. Yeah, I wish I was there on that first trip. I would have loved to have seen the orphanage back then. But, we're going to be able to share that with everyone through the film and a little bit more of your story. But just really appreciate you being vulnerable and open to talking about this, because I feel like a lot of people can get a lot out of it. And just, it brings home how real the situation is, but also, the amount of love and passion there is from yourself and from other people that are involved. And I think it's really inspiring. So yeah, I just want to tell you thank you for spending the time today and for all the work that you've been doing and the work you're going to be doing in the future. Really appreciate it.
Well, no, I thank you for, doing all of this and putting all of those stories out there as well for other people to learn from and, get more info about. So no, thank you, really. And you would have loved the orphanage for sure. It was a special place, very happy place.
Appreciate it, Axel, and looking forward to sharing some moments with you, maybe with the film, and maybe back down in South Africa one of these days.
Yeah, for sure.
In the not too distant future.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Thanks. Cheers, Axel.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to the Rhino Man podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you're excited to see the film succeed, please subscribe and review our podcast on Spotify and iTunes. Then follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Rhino Man the Movie. More details about Rhino Man, the social impact campaign, and future screenings are at rhinomanthemovie.org. To learn more about the Global Conservation Corps and their work, visit globalconservationcorps.org. Sign up for the newsletter and follow GCC on all of the social platforms. If you like this podcast, make sure to subscribe and catch up on GCC's Voices of Nature podcast, where Bob Ludke interviews a wide range of people who have dedicated their lives to making a difference in conservation. A special thanks goes out to Simone Wilson for the music for this podcast. He's the brilliant composer for Rhino Man the Movie. Learn more about his work at simonewilsonmusic.com. Until next time, I'm John Jerko, and this is the Rhino Man Podcast.